Long ago and far away, in a small and isolated village, there lived a man called Nebo. Nebo, his family and fellow villagers were all simple farmers who spent most of their time cultivating their fields, growing maize, vegetables and other crops. It was very hard work, and harvesting the crop was hardest of all, when everyone from the youngest child to the oldest man had to help out in the fields, working from dawn until dusk. Although it was a hard life, Nebo and the villagers always managed to grow enough to feed themselves. And at the end of each day, after the oxen had been unyoked and all the animals attended to, they could relax with a pot of beer to share between them, while the womenfolk prepared the evening meal. That was the time when they could enjoy a full and satisfying stew of meat and vegetables, well washed down with the potent beer, and talk about the world outside. None of the villagers had travelled very far afield, but each one knew exactly what the world was like, what other people looked like, what they wore, and what outlandish customs they followed. As the level of the beer fell lower and lower, so did the stories become more and more far-fetched. Everyone knew somebody who knew somebody else who had travelled long distances and had seen the most extraordinary sights. Strange-looking animals, villages so rich that nobody did any work, tribes of people who lived only in the trees, like the monkeys. Nebo always listened to these stories with fascination. Although he was quite content with his life, he longed to see some of these strange sights. One evening, the stories so inspired him that he decided there and then to leave the village and see for himself exactly how the rest of the world lived. Without delay, he ordered his wife to prepare a bundle for him, containing food and some money. And then, after bidding his wife and children farewell, he resolutely set off through the village gate. Everyone in the village was amazed at his courage and gathered around to wish him well and to tell him to return soon to tell them everything he had seen. Using the sun to guide him, Nebo journeyed on, not knowing what to expect, but quite sure that he would soon encounter the most wonderful-looking animals and people. It couldn't be otherwise, as he had lived such a restricted life before. All the animals he saw looked strange to him. All the plants were quite unfamiliar. It was the variety of the animals, the different shapes of the trees, the variation of the colours. These are what captivated this simple tribesman. After all, he had never been away from his village, and what may have seemed ordinary to a well-travelled person was miraculous to Nebo. He had always questioned if there was, in fact, a world outside his village. On and on he travelled, not encountering a single human being for many days. Perhaps, he thought, there are no other people on this earth except our own villagers. Even so, he had seen enough to be able to tell the village the most amazing stories when he returned. Even the most far-fetched story had never told about these strange animals with the long, long necks and patchwork hides, or the fierce birds, large as children, that perched high in the trees, always on the lookout for prey. Or the big monkeys that seemed so like human beings that at first Nebo had mistaken them for a band of people. Nebo was so fascinated by everything that he saw that he had no thought about turning back. Each day brought a different adventure. Each day many new things to look at. So on he walked through the open grassland, quite happy to go on and on until he reached the ends of the earth. One morning, quite suddenly, he encountered a very large herd of fine-looking cattle. He had never seen so many, and in what good condition they were. More importantly, they were being driven by a small boy, the first human Nebo had seen since he left home. Very excitedly, Nebo stopped him and asked him who the herd belonged to. Of course, the lad didn't understand a word. Again, Nebo asked him the same question, but still the lad didn't understand. So he replied simply, "Minu," and walked on. Minu, thought Nebo in wonder. Well, he must be a rich man to own such a fine herd. Deep in thought of this encounter, he walked on, pondering what he had seen. After he had left the herd, it seemed to Nebo that he walked for such a long distance without encountering another person. He was lonely and longed for his own people. He wondered whether or not he had come to the end of the land, but he kept up his courage by remembering lessons he had been taught in his youth. He used these memories as a way of forgetting how alone he was. He remembered his father's bravery, his mother's skills, and most important, he remembered how much they loved him. He didn't have to travel much further before he encountered a blacksmith fashioning his goods by the side of a track. The man was working at an intricate sculpture, and Nebo watched fascinated as the man transformed his iron into a lifelike figurine. "That's wonderful," Nebo cried in admiration. "And who does that portray?" The blacksmith looked amazed and replied, "Minu, Minu." Minu again, Nebo thought. What an important man this Minu must be. So on he journeyed, thinking about this rich person, until he reached a very fine-looking village, quite twice the size of his own. The huts were handsomely constructed, and the children looked fat and sleek. As this was the first village Nebo had reached since leaving home, he strolled around, looking at all the activity going on. He was lost in admiration at the skill of the villagers. Wherever he looked, they appeared to be making something wonderful, according to their own talent. He saw beautiful, colourful beadwork being made for every kind of ornament, from headdresses to ankle rings. A woodcarver chipped away at a piece of wood. "Who is that handsome carving for?" Nebo asked the man, who just looked at him in surprise. "Minu," he replied, and carried on with his work. Minu, of course, Nebo thought. "I wonder if I shall ever meet this extraordinary person." It was difficult for him to know which person to watch, which person to admire. The bead woman, the stone mason, the potter whose skilled fingers transformed a lump of wet clay into a delicate pot. Nebo was absolutely captivated by the care the potter devoted to every detail. And again he wondered at the loyalty of everyone he met towards the mysterious Minu. First, the beadworker, then the stonemason, then the head decorators, and now the potter. He marvelled at the fact that all these craftspeople had spent years perfecting their skills, and yet it seemed that everyone worked all day for the benefit of this one person. In his village, the craft workers did everything to benefit each other or to trade their goods with other villages. What happened here was very strange. Nebo had to admit that each person he met seemed prosperous, more so than anyone in his village. The continuing mystery of Minu began to cause Nebo to believe that the stories he would soon be telling to his village would make him very important. "Who is that for?" Nebo asked the potter as he watched her deftly mould the pot's shape. Without even taking her eyes off her work, she merely answered, "Minu," and carried on. This man must own the whole village, Nebo thought. All these people must be his slaves. All this fine work, all those animals and children must be his. Who would believe that just one person could be so rich and powerful? What a story I have to tell my family and friends when I return. Even the pot that I am watching being made belongs to him." And what seemed the strangest of all was that these people seemed to be quite happy working for this Minu. The woman took enormous care and great pleasure in fashioning the pot. Obviously nothing but the best was good enough for Minu. So Nebo walked from stall to stall, admiring the handiwork of each person. And just to confirm his own thoughts, he asked each one who was the owner of the work displayed. And each time the reply was the same: "Minu, Minu." Even the fruit seemed to belong to that man, although that didn't stop the stallholders kindly giving Nebo some fruit to quench his thirst. At least Minu seems to be a kindly ruler who looks after the welfare of his people and his herds, Nebo conceded. Nebo stared at the cattle. He noticed that the herds from the different areas were being brought together in one large enclosure. Although everyone worked extremely hard, they did not work for very long, compared to the routines which Nebo usually followed. As the afternoon wore on, the villagers gathered together, dressed in all their finery, and began to sing and dance. It was clearly a most important ceremony for the people, and Nebo was intrigued by this event. But when he asked the villagers whom they were honouring, they just shook their heads and smiled. Minu. Nebo noticed a river flowing not far from Minu's village, and as he had never before seen such a vast expanse of water, he decided that before he returned home, he would go and take a closer look at this strange sight. As he walked down to the banks, some of the villagers were fishing busily, skillfully spearing the fish or catching them in nets. Nebo was fascinated. He had never seen fishermen at work before. Very rarely had he tasted fish. How clever they were to impale these wriggling creatures on their spears, he thought. How swift they must be. Knowing already the answer to his question, he walked over to a fisherman and asked, "Who owns all these nets?" And the man replied, "Minu." "And who," Nebo persisted, "owns all the fish you have caught?" But again the man replied impatiently, "Minu." Just as I thought, Nebo thought to himself. This man owns everything. I shouldn't be surprised if he owned all the birds and insects that fly, the sun, the wind, and all the land around us. As he pondered this strange thought on his way back to the village, he was stopped by a funeral procession passing by. Nebo saw the dead man lying on the pole and asked the mourners who that unfortunate person was. Everyone ignored him, but he persisted with each mourner until at last one woman sadly replied, "Minu, walked on, weeping. Nebo was dumbstruck at the news. The richest man on the earth, who owned everything around, and yet even he has not been saved from death. Now was the time to return home. He bought some food to sustain him for the long journey back. Until today, he would have been curious about the different flavors of the food he was tasting. But now he thought only of home. He began the long journey home, thinking of how much he had learned. The most interesting part of this entire tale is that at no time did Nebo doubt that he understood what he was being told. He was slightly surprised at certain practices, but that was all. He did not realize he neither had had a real conversation with anyone, nor did anybody understand his questions. Minu? Minu just means